Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we turn our attention to the Great Lakes State, where Michigan's 1,700 miles of shoreline have witnessed more than beauty and commerce. Between the hours when patrol shifts change and dawn breaks over cold water, state troopers have filed reports that defy simple explanation. These are not folklore passed down through generations, but documented incidents drawn from official records, dispatch logs, and the testimonies of trained law enforcement officers who encountered something they could not reconcile with their years of experience. Michigan's lakes number in the thousands, from Superior's vast expanse to forgotten inland waters rimmed by pine and birch. When darkness settles over these places, the boundary between land and water becomes uncertain. And what emerges from that threshold has left investigators searching for answers that remain elusive. The accounts you will hear tonight have been verified through departmental archives, witness interviews, and corroborating evidence where it exists. Each case unfolded after midnight, when the state's highways grow quiet and the only lights belong to patrol vehicles making their solitary rounds. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late September of 2009 when Trooper Michael Davenport received the dispatch that would alter the trajectory of his career, though he would not understand the magnitude of that shift until years later. In the moment, it was simply another call, the kind that seasoned patrol officers categorize mentally as routine welfare checks. Davenport had spent 11 years with the Michigan State Police, most of them stationed in the Houghton Lake area, a region of resort towns, fishing cabins, gas stations that closed early, and locals who measured time not by calendars, but by the turning of the seasons. Summer overwhelmed the area with transient crowds and boat traffic. Autumn reduced it back to quiet, to the slow pulse of its lakes and the whispering forests that surrounded them. On this particular night, autumn had already asserted itself. The temperature hovered just above freezing 38 degrees, cold enough that fog drifted lightly across the marshy lowlands, hugging the southern shore of Houghton Lake. The fog wasn't the heavy kind that blankets entire roadways, but the creeping kind, moving in tendrils, slipping over the water's surface like a cautious animal. Davenport had driven these roads countless times. He had responded to crashes, fights, noise complaints from drunk vacationers, burglaries at rental cabins, and even the occasional missing kayaker. Each call demanded composure, and Davenport prided himself on never letting uncertainty or fear dictate his responses. His shift had been quiet so far. A speeding citation on M55, a noise complaint near a campground, and a quick check on a suspicious vehicle parked behind a closed bait shop. Familiar things. Predictable things. At 1:14 a.m., the radio on his dash crackled to life, a sharp, tinny interruption that cut through the stillness. Unit 231, copy a welfare check. He lifted the receiver. 231, go ahead. Dispatch continued. Motorist reports an individual standing waist-deep in Houghton Lake near the public boat launch off Old 27. Subject described as motionless, wearing dark clothing, facing away from shore. Caller is concerned about possible self-harm. Davenport acknowledged and began the short drive south. It took 8 minutes, the fog thickening with every mile. The beam of his headlights sliced through it in narrow cones, illuminating the wet glisten of cattails and the dark silhouettes of trees pressed close to the road. The boat launch was a familiar location, frequently used during summer months. In late September, at 1 in the morning, it would be deserted. When he arrived, he slowed, letting the vehicle roll to a stop on the gravel surface. He activated his spotlight and swept it across the lake. The water reflected almost nothing, just a flat black surface dissolving at the edges into a gray haze. He opened his door, stepped out, and felt the damp chill cling to him instantly. The smell of decaying vegetation peat, wet leaves, organic rot hang in the air. His boots crunched lightly on gravel as he approached the concrete launch ramp. He called out, identifying himself as state police. His voice traveled cleanly across the water, unbroken by wind or waves. Nothing answered. He scanned the shoreline, sweeping his flashlight beam through the reeds, across the shallow water, then farther into the lake. The silence was profound, the kind that seems to lean inward, amplifying even the smallest sound. The water lapped faintly at the ramp, just a soft, repetitive whisper. He kept walking, moving along the shoreline to increase his vantage point. The fog thickened, reducing visibility to no more than 30 feet. He felt the familiar tension of uncertainty, but not fear, at least not yet. Then he heard it. A low hum, soft at first, then clearer. It emanated from the water itself, deep, steady, almost warm in tone. Not mechanical, not the hollow vibration of a distant outboard motor, not the drone of a generator. This sound seemed alive, organic, like a single sustained note held by a choir whose voices lay just beneath the threshold of human hearing. Davenport froze and listened. The hum grew slightly, hovered at the edge of recognition, then faded slowly until it dissolved back into silence. The entire sequence lasted perhaps 20 seconds. When it ended, the absence of sound felt heavier than the hum itself. He radioed dispatch and gave a concise update. No visual contact, but an unusual sound had been detected. They asked if he needed backup. He declined. Years of training had made him reluctant to pull resources unless absolutely necessary. He continued his search along the water edge, sweeping his light inward. That was when he saw them, a set of wet footprints at the edge of the concrete ramp. Davenport leaned forward, angling his flashlight. The impressions were clear. Bare feet, adult-sized. The water still clung to their edges, indicating freshness. The prints ascended the ramp in a straight line, crossed the gravel for about 10 feet, and then stopped. Abruptly, as though the person who made them had vanished mid-stride. Davenport knelt beside them, examining the shape, the spacing. They were spaced normally, suggesting nothing erratic or hurried. Whoever they belonged to had walked calmly from the lake toward the parking area and then simply ceased to exist. He photographed them with his phone, measuring each to estimate a shoe size. Approximately size 11. He keyed the mic. "Dispatch. Send a unit. I need the scene secured." Deputy Carson arrived within 15 minutes. The two officers began a more thorough search of the area, moving systematically into the woods flanking the boat launch. Flashlights cut thin lines of light between trees as they called out into the darkness. Nothing. No broken branches, no discarded clothing, no dropped belongings, no signs of a struggle, no tracks beyond the drying footprints. By 4 a.m., they called off the EAD physical search. Davenport left the scene with a gnawing sense of incompletion, as though he had stepped into a story missing several crucial pages. The following morning, investigators returned. The faint outline of the footprints remained, though drying quickly. They collected further photographs, took soil samples, and mapped the positions exactly. A perimeter search of the lake's edge revealed nothing out of place, no abandoned vehicles, no personal items, nothing unusual. They tracked down the motorist who had made the initial call, a woman traveling home after visiting her sister. She described the figure she had seen as unmoving, facing away from shore like he was listening for something beneath the water. She had watched the figure for nearly 2 minutes before driving to a gas station to call authorities. When asked why she had not approached the person directly, her answer was unsettling. "I don't know," she said. The way he stood there, it felt wrong. Not dangerous, just wrong. As if I shouldn't interrupt. Investigators pressed further, but she offered no additional details. Only that she felt something she could not name. No missing persons fit the description. No nearby homes reported anyone unaccounted for. No clothing or personal effects washed ashore in the days that followed. Incident Report 479C was officially classified as unresolved. But for Davenport, the story didn't end. He returned to the boat launch twice in the following weeks, both visits after midnight, both unprompted. He would sit in his patrol car for long stretches, watching the lake through his windshield, headlights off, listening. On his second visit, he parked and walked down to the ramp. He later wrote in his personal log, not in the official report, that the stillness of the lake felt unnatural. Deliberate, he described it, as if the lake were holding its breath. He noted also that he felt watched, though he attributed that, reluctantly, to fatigue and anticipation, rather than any external presence. Still, he could not shake the memory of the footprints. Fresh, perfectly formed, and then gone. He replayed the hum in his mind, trying to classify it. He imagined machinery beneath the water impossible. He imagined a distant boat engine, no. He imagined wildlife no species could produce that sustained tonal vibration. He considered the possibility of a prank. Someone hiding, someone running, someone leaving the lake and retreating into the woods before his arrival. But the gravel offered no footprints beyond the 10 visible ones. The marsh offered no disturbances. The woods offered no sign of recent entry. The footprints ended, cleanly, decisively. Something, or someone, had walked out of Houghton Lake that night, and then ceased to follow any path Davenport recognized. No one matching the description was ever reported missing. No body surfaced. No further strange calls came from the area. Fishermen returned at dawn the next morning, unaware that the largest lake in Michigan's Lower Peninsula had hosted something unidentifiable a few hours earlier. The hum was never heard again. Houghton Lake resumed its seasonal stillness. But for Davenport, a subtle shift lingered, a sense that beneath the placid surface, something waited, something ancient, something patient, something capable of mimicking human shape but not human movement, something that left footprints that ended before the world could decide where they were supposed to go next. 2 years before the Houghton Lake incident, in the early hours of October 2007, Trooper Jennifer Hollis was assigned to overnight patrol on the Mackinac Bridge, the 5-mile engineering titan that connected Michigan's 2 peninsulas. Most people see the bridge as an iconic landmark, a postcard image of steel and suspension cables. Hollis saw it the way those who work it do, as a place of endless wind, shifting weight, and the constant hum of vehicles crossing a narrow ribbon between 2 massive lakes. The Mackinac Bridge is not merely a roadway suspended above water. It is a living, groaning structure influenced by weather, temperature, and unseen forces. The straits beneath it are a violent meeting point of Lakes Michigan and Huron, where cross-currents have swallowed ships and sailors long before anyone thought to build a bridge over them. The locals, especially older ones, believe the straits have a temperament, a mood, even a will of their own. Hollis, practical and methodical, had no patience for folklore. Her job was to enforce protocols, observe traffic, respond to calls, and ensure that nothing unauthorized occurred on a span where one wrong step or a moment's carelessness could mean a 200-foot plunge into chaotic, unforgiving water. By 2 a.m., the traffic had thinned to nearly nothing. The overnight hours were often monotonous. A semi-truck rolling north every 20 minutes, a lone sedan heading south. Then long stretches of silence, except for the constant moan of wind threading through the steel framework. Hollis preferred these hours. No tourists, no fender benders, no fights breaking out at campgrounds. Just her, the patrol car, and the ritual of sweeping the bridge from end to end. At 2:38 a.m., during a routine southbound pass, Hollis's headlights caught something that should not have been there. A figure walking along the eastern pedestrian walkway. Her mind snapped immediately to protocol. No pedestrians were allowed on the bridge, especially not after dark. The walkway was reserved for maintenance personnel and strictly off-limits to the public. The bridge authority had instructed all troopers to treat any pedestrian sighting as a priority. Suicides, stunts, intoxicated wanderers, these were the possibilities officers considered. The bridge demanded a zero-tolerance approach. She flicked on her emergency lights and slowed to a stop alongside the figure. The person walked with calm, steady purpose. No weaving, no staggering. The posture was straight, the gait rhythmic, hands down at their sides. The individual wore what looked like a long coat or garment that reached past the knees. Hollis lowered her window, calling out firmly, "State Police, stop and speak with me." The figure did not react, did not slow, did not turn. She felt a prickling at the back of her neck, the instant recognition that something about this wasn't right. Intoxicated pedestrians usually flinch or stumble when confronted. Suicidal individuals freeze or startle. Even mentally ill walkers often exhibit erratic movement. But this person's steady, unbroken pace was unnatural on a bridge where the metal walkway shook slightly with every gust of wind. She exited her vehicle, leaving the engine idling. The moment she opened the door, the wind slapped her across the face, cold, hard, and carrying the metallic tang of rust mixed with the scent of cold water. The breeze tugged at her uniform, pulled at her hat, and whipped strands of hair against her cheek. She called out again, louder this time. "State Police, I need you to stop." Still nothing. She approached cautiously, flashlight in hand, boots clinking against the grated walkway. The figure continued walking, the long coat fluttering slightly in the wind. As Hollis drew closer, she noticed something else strange. No shoes. The individual's feet moved silently across the damp metal grid. Bare skin on freezing steel. That alone was enough to trigger a surge of adrenaline. The walkway was cold enough to numb a foot within minutes, especially with wind chill. Anyone walking barefoot in such conditions had either lost their shoes in distress or had no physiological response to the cold at all. At roughly 10 feet away, Hollis reached out instinctively, intending to tap the figure on the shoulder. That was when the person stopped. Completely. Without any transitional slowing. No shift in weight. No hesitation. One moment moving, the next moment still, as if a switch had been flipped. The figure did not turn to face her. It simply stood there, rigid, head slightly bowed. The coat, if it was a coat, hung oddly, as though its weight didn't match its appearance. It wasn't a fabric. The surface was too smooth, too uniform, almost like wet, heavy tarp or something thicker. Something not meant to be worn. Hollis's breath caught as she angled her flashlight to see the figure's profile. For a split second, she thought she was looking at the side of someone's head wrapped in material. There were no features, no ears, no cheekbone, no contours of a jaw. Just a smooth, pale surface like wax or soft clay left outside in cold air. The light reflected off it with a dull sheen, not the sheen of healthy skin, but the reflection of something artificial. She stepped backward involuntarily. Her training instructed her to speak, to attempt communication, to issue commands, but her instincts overrode procedure. Something deep, something evolutionary, warned her that this was not a person. At least, not a person as she understood the term. She opened her mouth to call for assistance when the figure moved, slowly, deliberately, turning toward her in a way that seemed almost too controlled, too balanced, as if the movement was being calculated rather than performed. When it faced her fully, she felt something she had never felt on duty, not fear, not panic, but a crushing pressure in her chest. As though the air around her had thickened into a heavy fluid, she was being forced to breathe. The sensation was absolute, immediate, and impossible to explain. She stumbled backward, her hand fumbling for the radio clipped to her shoulder. The pressure intensified, her lungs compressing, her heartbeat hammering loudly in her ears. She keyed the mic. Dispatch requesting immediate backup on the bridge. Possible pedestrian unknown condition. Send units now. Her voice betrayed only urgency, not the surreal terror she felt. She looked back up, and the figure was gone. Not walking away, not running, not climbing the rail, simply gone. The walkway ahead was empty from one end to the horizon, lit by sodium lights. Behind her, the path was also empty, unobstructed all the way to the North Tower. She ran to the railing, shining her flashlight downward, peering through gusts of wind that ripped at her uniform. The water below was a black, churning mass, broken by whitecaps. Nothing floated. Nothing moved except the natural violence of the straits. She returned to her vehicle, heart still pounding, and repeated her call for assistance. Supervisors and 2 additional troopers arrived within minutes. Together, they swept the bridge in a coordinated line. Maintenance stairs, support platforms, railing edges, vehicle lanes. No sign of anyone. Hollis was instructed to return to the station for debriefing. Another team pulled up surveillance footage recorded between 2:20 and 2:45 a.m. The footage showed her patrol car stopping, showed her exiting, showed her walking toward the pedestrian walkway. But nothing else. No additional figure, no blurred shape, no anomaly. The cameras showed her speaking to empty air before running to the railing. The timestamps matched her radio transmissions exactly. In her written report, Hollis used clinical language, following protocol. Observed unidentified pedestrian. Subject did not respond to verbal commands. Subject disappeared from visual range. She did not mention the face. She did not mention the pressure in her chest. She did not mention the silence that followed the disappearance. A silence so complete, it felt intentional. 2 weeks later, she submitted a request for transfer. During her exit interview, the supervisor noted her strong performance record and asked why she wished to leave a position she excelled in. Her answer was measured and unwavering. "I'm not afraid of what happened," she said. "But I don't believe the bridge is meant for people to walk at night. Not all people." When pressed for clarification, she refused to elaborate. She described the figure, not in official documents, but privately, as an absence shaped like a person. Something that occupied space without belonging to it. Something that looked human only in the way a shadow resembles the form casting it. Bridge Authority reacted quickly, increasing overnight patrols, adding cameras on the eastern walkway, and instructing maintenance crews to report anything unusual, no matter how trivial. Crews later whispered among themselves that the eastern tower felt different after that night. Many reported a persistent sensation of being watched while performing inspections. A few even claimed to hear footsteps behind them on the walkway, slow, steady, barefoot steps that stopped the moment they turned. No official reports followed. But the straits below continued their eternal, indifferent churn, and the bridge above them remained a place where impossible things, on rare occasions, walked as though they belonged. In August of 2013, Trooper Aaron Walsh found himself responding to a call that would embed itself so deeply into his memory that, years later, he still replayed it frame by frame. searching for a missing explanation he doubted he would ever find. Walsh had been stationed in the Traverse City region for 7 years, a stretch long enough to grow accustomed to the area's rhythms, the alternating surges of summer tourism and the quiet that followed when Labor Day emptied the beaches. Grand Traverse Bay was beautiful in a postcard sense, but Walsh knew it as a place where crimes washed ashore like driftwood. On the night in question, the temperature was 62 degrees, cooler than usual for August, and a steady breeze pushed inland from the bay. The scent in the air was familiar lake water, heavy with algae, damp sand, and a faint undercurrent of decomposing plant matter. Clinch Park, where Walsh was headed, was normally silent at that hour, save for the repetitive sigh of waves collapsing onto the shore. Dispatch relayed the details at 3:19 a.m. A late-night beach walker had called to report a body lying face down in the shallows 10 feet from shore. Not moving, not responding, possibly deceased. Walsh acknowledged the call and drove toward the location, keeping his speed moderate. His experience had taught him that accidents near water often looked worse than they were. Drunk swimmers, lost joggers, tourists who misjudged their limits. The majority ended with EMTs reviving someone who had spent one too many hours on the beach. But that night, as he parked and retrieved his flashlight and first aid kit from the trunk, he noticed something that gave him pause. The beach was too still. Not the normal kind of stillness that comes after midnight, but a heavy, anticipatory quiet, as if the shoreline were listening. He descended the wooden stairs from the parking area, each step creaking softly beneath his weight. From the bottom, the sand stretched out like a darkened sheet, the waterline illuminated faintly by streetlights behind him. He scanned the area, his flashlight cutting through the gentle surf. He saw the body immediately, a shape lying face down in about 2 feet of water, waves rolling over its back and slipping around its limbs. The figure was motionless, bordered by the pale froth of each small breaking wave. Walsh waded in without hesitation. Cold water flooded his boots, soaking his socks, numbing his toes. It took him fewer than 10 seconds to reach the body. He placed a hand on the man's back jeans, flannel shirt, heavy with water, and attempted to check for a pulse at the neck. Nothing. The skin beneath his fingers was cold, and not simply lake cold. Something deeper. Something not right. Walsh gripped the victim beneath the arms and dragged him toward shore. The body resisted with the weight of saturated clothing, joints bending only with force. Once clear of the water, Walsh rolled the man face up to evaluate whether CPR was an option. Then time seemed to stop. The face staring up at him in the beam of his flashlight did not belong to any living creature he recognized. The proportions were wrong. The eyes were too large, too widely spaced, bulging slightly, as though pressurized from within. The mouth stretched in a perfectly straight line, unnaturally long, reaching nearly from ear to ear, though the curvature of the head made it unclear whether ear-like structures even existed beneath the skin. The skin itself had a grayish pallor, not blue from drowning, not pale from blood loss, but an ashen tone that looked artificial, as if manufactured. Walsh's breath caught. His knees nearly gave out. His training pulled him back from the brink of shock, forcing him into mechanical procedure. He radioed dispatch. Possible drowning victim. Severe deformities. Need EMT response and backup immediately. He didn't trust himself to say more. He didn't trust himself to say what he had really seen. He knelt beside the figure, staring at details that grew stranger the longer he observed them. The clothing was normal department store jeans, a flannel shirt slightly worn at the elbows. But the hands protruding from the sleeves were wrong, the fingers too long, the joints misplaced, the tips tapering into hardened points that might have been nails or something else. The chest did not rise or fall. No water leaked from the mouth. The body's rigidity was inconsistent with recent drowning. 8 minutes later, 2 EMTs and a deputy sheriff arrived. The EMTs approached the body, knelt beside it, and their expressions shifted from professional detachment to confusion. One of them touched the skin and recoiled slightly, not dramatically, but enough to indicate that whatever they felt was unexpected. They confirmed no vital signs. They reported no bloating, no foam, no signs of a typical drowning. They found no trauma, no wounds, no evidence of decomposition. The body was simultaneously fresh and wrong. The deputy sheriff, trying to maintain procedure, requested identification. Walsh leaned down, scanning the pockets carefully. Something protruded from the front shirt pocket, a laminated card, a driver's license. He pulled it out, shining his flashlight over the text. David Myers. Traverse City resident, 34 years old. Clean-shaven in the photo. Clear blue eyes, normal human face. The discrepancy between the photo and the body lying beside him hit Walsh like a blow. He handed the license to the deputy, who read it aloud to the EMTs. Dispatch was contacted again. A quick record search confirmed that David Myers had been reported missing 6 hours earlier by his wife. Last seen leaving home for an evening walk along the beach. Hearing the name on the radio, Walsh felt the temperature of the night drop further. He looked again at the body's face, unmoving, inhuman. If this was David Myers, something had happened to him that defied medical explanation. Mrs. Myers was contacted and insisted on coming to the scene, despite warnings. She arrived 20 minutes later, pale, frantic, wearing slippers and a sweater thrown over a nightshirt. When the deputy gently suggested she remain a distance from the body, she insisted she could identify her husband. But when her eyes fell on the figure lying on the stretcher under the EMT's portable lights, she froze. Her expression shifted rapidly from grief to confusion to horror. She shook her head violently. "That's not him," she whispered. Then louder, "That's not my husband. That is not my husband." She backed away, trembling, and refused to go near the stretcher again. The EMTs exchanged silent glances. Walsh felt something unsettling twist in his gut, not fear exactly, but a recognition that they were dealing with something outside the boundaries of normal procedure. The body was transported to the county morgue. The medical examiner arranged for an autopsy to be performed the following afternoon. The preliminary notes he recorded described extensive craniofacial anomalies inconsistent with any known syndrome, traumatic injury, or environmental distortion. Walsh expected closure the next day. He expected a medical explanation, however improbable. Instead, the situation took a turn that pushed the incident from bizarre into impossible. The following morning, when the medical examiner arrived at the morgue, the drawer containing the body was empty, not tampered with, not broken open, no scratches on the metal, no damage to the lock. The morgue's internal cameras showed no entries or exits overnight. No motion. Nothing. The body was simply gone. Every person with access to the morgue was interviewed. The building's perimeter was checked. The autopsy room was inspected. Nothing was missing except the corpse of David Myers, or whatever, had looked like him. The sheriff's department classified it as a missing person case, with unresolved forensic irregularities. The phrase meant nothing and too much at the same time. Mrs. Myers moved out of state within a month. She refused all interviews, from police and reporters alike. Her last statement on record was the one she made that night on the beach. "That wasn't my husband." Walsh submitted a request for reassignment 6 months later. Officially, he cited a desire for new professional challenges. Unofficially, He told no one, not even his closest colleagues, what he truly felt when he looked at the body's face that night. Not fear. Recognition. Recognition of something that should not exist near human shores. Something that wore human clothing, but not a human form. Something that could walk along a familiar beach on a calm night and sink into the water without leaving a trace. Something that could leave its remains behind and then take them back. Clinch Park remains open to the public. Families swim there. Couples walk hand in hand along the boardwalk. Joggers run the shoreline at dawn. Tourists take pictures of sunsets, unaware that 10 years earlier, something washed ashore that had no business being found on human sand. Something the water returned to itself. By the time Trooper Daniel Cortez set foot on Isle Royale on November 8, 2010, Lake Superior had already begun its annual transformation, from a restless inland sea to a vast, icy void, capable of swallowing ships whole. Most people who have lived long enough near its shores claim the lake behaves like a living intelligence. Its moods shift abruptly. Its storms form out of nothing. Fog materializes without warning. And its silence, when it chooses silence, is thick enough to feel like a physical presence leaning close, listening. Cortez did not believe such stories. He was pragmatic, detail-oriented, thorough. That was why the Michigan State Police trusted him with work few troopers enjoyed: communications issues, remote assignments, tasks that required both technical skill and the patience to stand in freezing weather, while antennas refused to cooperate. He had completed the communications course at the academy with high marks, and over his 12-year career, he repeatedly volunteered for difficult posts. But nothing in his file suggested he was prepared for what awaited him on Isle Royale. The island, sitting 45 miles off the Upper Peninsula, was already in winter lockdown by the time he arrived. Only park rangers remained, and even they had vacated for the season 1 week prior. The inbound Coast Guard cutter was the last official vessel to visit for months. After this, the island would be left to the wolves, the winds, and whatever else old-timers claimed lived in Superior's deep waters. Cortez disembarked with 2 days of supplies, a portable lantern, a toolkit, and a duffel bag. The cutter's engines reverberated through the bay as it pulled away, leaving him standing alone on the weathered wooden dock. The surrounding silence swallowed the engine noise quickly, as though the lake itself snuffed it out. Ahead of him, Isle Royale stretched in a mix of dense forest, rocky terrain, and abandoned seasonal buildings. The Rock Harbor Lighthouse was roughly 3/4 of a mile east, along the rocky shoreline, a squat, square stone structure built in the 1800s. Its decommissioned beacon had not lit the lake in decades, but the building still housed radio equipment used seasonally by the National Park Service. According to the Coast Guard, that equipment had begun malfunctioning 2 days earlier. Incoming transmissions were garbled, outgoing signals died mid-sentence, and all activity eventually degraded into static so thick it drowned out every channel. The Coast Guard had dismissed initial interference as autumn storms until the static started bleeding into emergency frequencies as well. With rangers already gone for the year, the state police were asked to send someone with communications training before the harshest winter weather rolled in. That someone had been Cortez. He made his way along the shoreline path. The sky was a dull, uniform gray, the kind that pressed down as though the clouds were inches above the treetops. The air smelled metallic, cold even for November. Snow had not yet fallen, but the promise of it hovered like an unspoken threat. By the time Cortez reached the lighthouse, the cutter had long vanished behind the curvature of the island. The building stood like a monument to abandonment, its stone walls darkened by moisture. The old lantern room above sealed shut with rusted metal plates. The front door creaked as he forced it open. a gust of trapped cold air sweeping out as though the building exhaled. Inside, the temperature felt at least 10 degrees colder than the air outside. His lantern pushed only a narrow circle of light across peeling wallpaper and dusty floorboards. The lighthouse smelled faintly of mildew and something colder, something metallic, like machinery that had been left to freeze. He found the radio room on the second floor, where a window overlooked the gray expanse of Superior. The equipment sat on a scarred wooden table. Dust coated everything except the radio itself, indicating recent attempts by park staff to resolve the issue. He powered up the system. The display hummed to life. He keyed the microphone. Static exploded from the speaker, loud, dense, identical across every frequency he checked. The static was not random, however. It had a structure, a rhythm beneath it he could not immediately identify. He adjusted the gain, swapped cables, checked the battery pack, toggled through emergency channels. Nothing changed. The static remained constant, impenetrable. For 2 hours, Cortez worked, occasionally stepping outside to adjust the external antenna. With every test, every adjustment, the static persisted like a stubborn pulse. By late afternoon, the sky darkened further. Snow threatened the horizon. The temperature dropped. Cortez decided to wait until full nightfall to test atmospheric interference conditions. Sometimes radios behaved differently after sunset. He ate from his rations and wrote a partial report in his notebook detailing every test conducted. He felt no fear, only frustration. The lighthouse was quiet except for distant waves pounding the rocky shoreline. At 10:30 p.m., he returned to the radio room. The darkness outside was absolute. His lantern felt insufficient against the shadows that pooled in corners and clung to the stairwell. Even inside the lighthouse, the air seemed to shift subtly, carrying a faint vibration like something deep in the stone itself was humming. He sat down, powered the radio, and keyed the mic again. Rock Harbor Base to Sector Salt. Do you copy? Static. He keyed again. Rock Harbor Base to any vessel on Superior. Request signal check. Static. But beneath the static, something changed. He leaned closer, adjusting the volume. The noise wasn't consistent anymore. It pulsed, softly, slowly, like breath. In, out, in, out. Cortez froze. He switched frequencies. The breathing followed. He switched again, still there. By the time he scanned across every available channel, his hands had begun to tremble. Not from cold, from something else, something primal. Because the breathing wasn't random. It had cadence, depth, pattern. It sounded as though someone or something was standing only inches from the microphone on the other end. Hello? Cortez said, suddenly unsure. The breathing paused. Then, through a burst of static, a voice emerged. Soft, calm, familiar. Daniel. Cortez stopped breathing altogether. He had never transmitted his name. He had not keyed the mic when the voice spoke. He lifted his finger, hovering it over the transmit button, but fear paralyzed him. The voice spoke again. Daniel. You should leave. This time the tone shifted slightly. Not threatening, not even urgent, but knowing. Intimate. Like a parent quietly waking a child from a nightmare. Cortez dropped the mic. The room seemed to constrict around him. The shadows leaned in closer. He felt a pressure on his chest, a tightness that made his heart pound painfully. He grabbed his lantern, tools forgotten, and practically flew down the stairs. The lighthouse air felt heavier with every step, as though the building itself were aware of him. Outside, the night air hit him with a sharp slap of cold. He didn't care. He hurried back toward the ranger station, lantern swinging wildly in his hand. Inside the shuttered station, he locked the door behind him and sat with his back against the wall, gasping. After several minutes, he forced himself to approach the backup radio system. He powered it on. Static, breathing. And then Daniel. He killed the power. The silence that followed was worse. He lay awake the rest of the night, lantern burning beside him, listening to the building moan under the weight of the wind. At times he thought he heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate steps circling the station. Once he thought someone stopped right beside the window. He didn't look. At dawn, exhausted and shaking, Cortez returned to the lighthouse. What he found stopped him cold. The radio equipment, the same equipment that had functioned perfectly hours earlier, was destroyed. Not broken, not smashed. Melted. The plastic housings drooped like wax near an open flame. The metal components were warped. Circuit boards had fused together into blackened slabs. But nothing else in the room was burned. No scorch marks on the wood, no signs of fire. Just the radio, as though a heat source had been directed at it intentionally. Cortez photographed everything, hands trembling. He activated his personal emergency beacon and waited on the shoreline for the cutter to return. It arrived 3 hours later. He boarded without speaking to anyone. His written report blamed an electrical surge. Atmospheric interference consistent with Lake Superior weather patterns. Those were the words he wrote. He never mentioned the voice, never mentioned the breathing, never mentioned the way the voice said his name with a familiarity that made him feel known in a way no human radio operator could. Years later, in retirement, he finally told the truth during a private interview. The voice didn't just know my name, he said. It knew me. It felt like something had been waiting for me. Specifically me. I can explain how I know that, but I do. He told the interviewer he would never return to Isle Royale. Not for work, not for memory, not even to prove to himself that nothing was there. The thing that spoke, he said quietly, wasn't he warning me. It was disappointed, like it didn't expect me to run. The lighthouse remains exactly as it was, empty, shuttered, surrounded by endless, icy water. Its windows stare blankly across Lake Superior, waiting for a visitor that may never come again. But those who know the lake stories say this: nothing on Isle Royale truly sleeps. Not for long. Along Michigan's western shore, where Lake Michigan meets the industrial port of Muskegon, Trooper Rebecca Lyons patrolled a stretch of highway that ran parallel to the lakefront. It was March of 2012, late winter, when ice still clung to the piers and the channel leading from Muskegon Lake to the open lake remained partially frozen. Lyons had drawn the midnight shift, a quiet rotation that typically involved monitoring the occasional drunk driver or checking on closed businesses. The highway offered long views of the channel, where 2 lighthouses stood at the pier ends, one red, one white, marking the safe passage for vessels brave enough to navigate the frigid waters. At 1:45 a.m., Lyons pulled into an observation area overlooking the channel to complete paperwork. The night was clear, temperature below freezing, and the lake stretched black and still beneath a field of stars. She parked facing the water, her headlights off, engine running for warmth. The red lighthouse at the south pier displayed a steady glow, automated and reliable. The white lighthouse, however, had been dark for maintenance, its beacon disabled pending repairs. As Lyons worked through her incident log, she glanced up and noticed both lighthouses were now illuminated. She set her paperwork aside and focused on the white lighthouse. Its light pulsed in an irregular pattern, 3 long pulses, 2 short, then a sustained glow before going dark again. She radioed dispatch to inquire whether the white lighthouse had been returned to service. Dispatch confirmed it remained non-operational, and suggested she report the observation to the Coast Guard. Before she could respond, the pattern changed. The white lighthouse began pulsing in what she recognized as Morse code, a skill she had learned years earlier during her time in the reserves. The message repeated, STAYAWAY. Lyons felt a chill unrelated to the outside temperature. She retrieved binoculars from her vehicle and focused on the white lighthouse. Through the lenses, she could see the structure clearly old and weathered, its walkway covered in ice. No figure stood near the light. No boat approached the pier. The light continued its pattern, steady and deliberate, the message repeating. She drove to the pier entrance, a gated area closed to the public during winter months. The gate was locked, chains secured with a padlock covered in frost. She continued along the access road, circling to get a better vantage point, and stopped again to observe. The white lighthouse remained active, its message unchanging. A second patrol car arrived, Trooper Marcus Green, responding to Lyons' radio call. Together, they watched the lighthouse, both confirming the pattern, both recording it on their phones. Green suggested they contact the harbor master, who might have access to the pier and could investigate directly. The harbor master, reached at his home, stated the lighthouse electrical systems were completely disconnected and had been for 3 weeks. He agreed to meet them at the pier within 30 minutes. While they waited, the light pattern changed again. It no longer pulsed, but glowed steadily, growing brighter until it illuminated the entire pier structure with an intensity far beyond the original beacon's capacity. Lyons and Green shielded their eyes. The light so brilliant it cast shadows across the parking area where they stood. Then it went dark, not gradually, but instantly, as though someone had severed the power. The harbor master arrived, unlocked the gate, and led them onto the pier. They walked the icy planks carefully, flashlights cutting through the darkness, until they reached the white lighthouse. The harbor master unlocked the door, and they entered the small structure. The electrical panel hung open, wires disconnected, exactly as he had described. No power source was present, no batteries, no generator, no explanation for what they had witnessed. Lyons examined the area around the lighthouse, searching for any equipment that might produce light. She found nothing except ice and rust and the smell of old metal. The three of them stood in silence, the lake murmuring against the pier pilings below. The Coast Guard was notified the following morning. An investigation concluded that atmospheric conditions, combined with ice reflection and possible aurora-related phenomena, might have created an optical illusion. The report noted the coincidental Morse code pattern as statistically unlikely but not impossible, given the random nature of atmospheric light distortion. The white lighthouse was repaired and returned to service in April. No further unusual activity has been documented. Lyons transferred to a different patrol district 6 months later, citing personal reasons. Green remained in the Muskegon area, but requested reassignment away from lakefront routes. The channel continues its function, guiding vessels through the dark, the lighthouses burning their steady warnings into the night. Further north along Michigan's western coast lies Charlevoix, a resort town where Lake Michigan meets Lake Charlevoix through a narrow channel spanned by a drawbridge. In July of 2014, Trooper Kevin Marsh worked the summer shift, dealing primarily with traffic violations and tourist-related complaints. The region swells with visitors during warm months, and state police presence increases accordingly. Marsh had been assigned to overnight patrol, monitoring the highway that curved along the shore between Charlevoix and Petoskey. At 11:53 p.m., he stopped at a scenic overlook to check in with dispatch. The overlook provided a view of Lake Michigan's northern expanse, the water illuminated by moonlight, small waves catching silver as they rolled toward shore. The night was warm, humid, the air carrying the scent of pine and water. Marsh completed his check-in and prepared to continue his patrol. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 11:55 p.m. He started the engine, shifted into drive, and pulled onto the highway. The road was empty, no other vehicles visible in either direction. He drove south toward Charlevoix, maintaining his standard patrol speed. Within what felt like minutes, he noticed the sky beginning to lighten, not the glow of city lights, but the pale gray of approaching dawn. Confused, he checked the clock again. It read 4:37 a.m. Nearly 5 hours had passed, yet he had no memory of them. His trip odometer showed he had driven only 6 miles from the overlook, a distance that should have taken less than 10 minutes. Marsh pulled over, his heart rate elevated, and tried to reconstruct the missing time. He remembered leaving the overlook, remembered the empty road, but nothing after. No stops, no calls, no incidents. He checked his radio log, no transmissions recorded. He examined his notebook, no entries made. He felt physically normal, no signs of illness or injury. But the hours had simply vanished. He radioed dispatch, explaining the situation as calmly as possible. Dispatch confirmed his 11:53 check-in and noted no further contact until his current transmission at 4:41 a.m. They asked if he required medical assistance. He declined, but requested permission to return to the post for evaluation. A supervisor met him at the Petoskey post at 5:20 a.m. Marsh submitted to a medical screening, including blood tests and a neurological examination. All results returned normal. He was questioned extensively about the events of the night, asked to provide every detail he could recall. He repeated what he knew. He left the overlook at 11:55, drove south, and suddenly it was nearly 5 a.m. A review of his patrol vehicle's GPS data showed something inexplicable. The vehicle had remained stationary at the overlook from 11:55 p.m. until 4:36 a.m., when it resumed movement. However, Marsh clearly remembered driving, remembered the feel of the road beneath the tires, the headlights cutting through darkness. The GPS data contradicted his experience entirely. Colleagues drove the route later that morning, checking for any location where signal interference might cause GPS errors. They found none. The highway was straight, well-maintained, with clear sight lines and reliable cellular coverage. Nothing suggested technical failure. Marsh was placed on administrative leave for 2 weeks, during which he underwent psychological evaluation. The psychologist found no evidence of mental disorder, no signs of dissociation or memory impairment. Marsh described the experience not as traumatic, but as disturbing. In its completeness, he had not blacked out or lost consciousness, but had somehow existed in 2 states simultaneously, driving and stationary, aware and absent. He returned to duty, but requested transfer to a district away from the lakeshore. The transfer was granted, and he completed his career without further incident. In a statement given years later, Marsh acknowledged he could not explain what occurred that night. He stated only that certain places along Michigan's shores seemed to operate by rules that did not align with conventional understanding. The scenic overlook remains a popular stop for travelers, its view unchanged, its secrets held close by the water that stretches beyond sight. At the northernmost tip of Michigan's Upper Peninsula lies the Keweenaw, a finger of land jutting into Lake Superior's frigid expanse. Trooper Lisa Hoffman worked this isolated territory in September of 2015, responsible for patrolling highways that wound through forests and along cliffs where Superior crashed against ancient rock. The region is sparsely populated. Its economy long ago shifted from copper mining to tourism, leaving behind ghost towns and abandoned structures that slowly surrender to weather and time. On the night of September 23rd, Hoffman responded to a report of a vehicle accident on Highway 41 near Eagle Harbor. The caller described a car in the ditch, headlights on, no one visible inside. Fog had rolled in from the lake that evening, thick and disorienting, reducing visibility to less than 50 feet. Hoffman proceeded slowly, her emergency lights painting the fog in pulses of red and blue. She located the vehicle within 20 minutes, a sedan resting at an angle in the shallow ditch, front end buried in underbrush. The headlights remained on, engine off, the driver's door hanging open. She approached cautiously, announcing her presence, flashlight sweeping the interior. No one occupied the vehicle. No blood, no signs of struggle, no personal belongings visible except a phone on the passenger seat. She retrieved the phone and checked for recent calls. The last entry showed a 911 call made 43 minutes earlier, matching the timeline of the accident report. She radioed for a tow truck and began searching the surrounding area, calling out and listening for any response. The fog absorbed her voice, returning only silence. As she moved along the roadside, her flashlight beam caught movement ahead, a figure standing perhaps 30 feet away, obscured by fog. Hoffman called to them, asking if they were injured, if they needed assistance. The figure did not respond but began walking away, parallel to the highway, moving with an awkward gait that suggested injury. Hoffman followed, maintaining verbal contact, identifying herself repeatedly. The figure continued, never turning, never acknowledging her presence. The distance between them remained constant, as though the individual matched her pace exactly. She increased her speed, attempting to close the gap, but the figure stayed ahead, always at the edge of visibility. The fog grew denser, until Hoffman could barely see 10 feet in any direction. She felt the ground beneath her feet change from gravel shoulder to soft earth, realized she had left the roadside entirely. She stopped, orienting herself, and called out one final time. No response came. The figure had vanished into the white void. Hoffman retraced her steps carefully, using her flashlight to navigate back to the road. When she reached her patrol vehicle, she found the tow truck had arrived, its driver waiting beside the sedan. He asked if she had found the driver. She stated she had pursued someone into the woods, but lost them in the fog. A search was organized for the following morning, once daylight and improved visibility would allow proper coverage. Hoffman led a team of deputies and volunteers into the forest, where she had followed the figure. They combed the area for 3 hours, searching for any trace footprints, clothing, signs of passage. They found nothing. The forest floor, covered in pine needles and moss, showed no disturbance beyond their own tracks. The sedan was identified as belonging to a local resident who was subsequently located at home, unharmed. She stated her car had been stolen from her driveway 2 nights earlier, and she had filed a police report. She had not been near Eagle Harbor and could not explain how her vehicle ended up in the ditch. The phone found inside belonged to no one. Its serial number did not match any registered device, and attempts to access its contents failed due to encryption. Hoffman filed her report, noting the figure in the fog, but offering no speculation about its identity or intent. She continued her patrols in the Keweenaw for another year before accepting a position downstate. When asked about the incident in a later interview, she described the figure's movement as wrong, not injured, but mechanical, as though it were mimicking human locomotion without understanding it. The highway through Eagle Harbor remains open. Fog still rolls in from Superior with regularity, and travelers are advised to drive with caution when visibility declines. In the eastern region of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, the Au Sable River winds through forests and emptiness before meeting Lake Huron. Trooper James Collier, patrolled this territory in November of 2016, responsible for a section of highway that paralleled the river for nearly 30 miles. The area is known for its fishing and its silence, a place where small towns cluster along the water and the spaces between grow dark and deep. At 2:12 a.m., Collier observed a series of lights moving along the river, visible through gaps in the tree line. The lights were bright, blue-white, and moved in formation, 5 distinct points, maintaining precise spacing as they traveled upstream. He slowed his vehicle, watching the phenomenon, attempting to identify the source. The lights were too bright for flashlights, too organized for natural phenomena. He turned onto a Forest Service road that provided access to the river, driving slowly over the rutted surface until he reached a clearing near the water's edge. He parked and exited his vehicle, flashlight in hand. The lights were now directly across from his position, approximately 50 yards distant, hovering several feet above the river's surface. Collier called out, his voice carrying across the water. The lights stopped moving. They hung motionless for perhaps 10 seconds, then began to rise, ascending vertically with no sound of engines or rotors. He grabbed his phone and attempted to photograph them, but the camera refused to focus, the image blurring regardless of his efforts. The lights reached a height he estimated at 100 feet, formed a circular pattern, and began to pulse in sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, each light brightening and dimming in turn. The pattern repeated 3 times. Then, simultaneously, all 5 lights streaked eastward toward Lake Huron, covering the distance to the horizon in less than 2 seconds. Collier stood alone in the darkness, the river murmuring past, his flashlight suddenly seeming inadequate. He returned to his vehicle and radioed dispatch, reporting unidentified aerial lights near the Au Sable River. Dispatch logged the report and inquired whether he required support. He stated he would continue his patrol and monitor for further activity. No other reports of unusual lights were filed that night. Collier completed his shift and submitted a written account of the observation. The report was forwarded to the Michigan State Police Aviation Unit, which noted that no authorized aircraft were operating in the area at the time. The Federal Aviation Administration was contacted and confirmed no flight plans matched the description or location. In the weeks following, Collier drove the Forest Service road multiple times, returning to the clearing where he had observed the lights. He found no physical evidence, no landing marks, no debris, no disturbance to the vegetation. The river continued its flow, indifferent to what might have traveled above it. A local newspaper published a brief article about the sighting, which generated letters from residents claiming similar observations over the years. The accounts varied in detail, but shared common elements: bright lights, precise movement, silence. None had been officially investigated. Collier declined interview requests, stating through a spokesperson that he had reported what he observed and had nothing further to add. He completed his service with the state police and retired in 2020. The lights have not been seen again, or if they have not been reported. The river flows on, its surface reflecting stars and darkness in equal measure, while the forests that line its banks keep whatever secrets they hold. The Great Lakes hold more than water. They hold memory, mystery, and the accumulated weight of countless stories spoken and unspoken. Michigan's 1,700 miles of shoreline form a boundary between the familiar and the unknown, a threshold where trained observers, men and women sworn to protect and serve, have encountered phenomena that resist explanation. These are not tales told around campfires, but documented incidents logged in official files, supported by testimony from individuals whose credibility is beyond question. Yet the answers they sought remain elusive, lost in fog and darkness and the cold depths of inland seas. What walks the shore after midnight? What calls from the water when patrols pass by? The troopers who filed these reports cannot say with certainty, and perhaps that uncertainty is the truest answer we can expect. The landscape does not explain itself. The lakes do not surrender their secrets to those who ask. What remains are the accounts themselves, careful, measured, haunted by the weight of what was seen and what could not be understood. Each case stands alone, yet together they suggest a pattern, a recurring theme woven through Michigan's nights. Water and darkness intersect, creating spaces where the ordinary rules bend or break entirely. The footprints that end in empty air, the voice that knows your name, the lights that move with impossible precision. These elements repeat across different locations, different witnesses, different years, as though the lakes themselves remember and choose their moments to remind us that our understanding remains incomplete. The troopers who experienced these incidents continued their work, most of them returning to patrol routes and responding to calls and maintaining the order that society requires. But something changed in them. A subtle shift in perspective that those who know them describe as a new awareness, a recognition that the world contains more than can be measured or explained. They drive the same roads, watch the same shorelines, but they watch differently now, with the knowledge that what they might see next could exceed the boundaries of their training and experience. Michigan's lakes remain vast and cold and patient. Superior stretches north into Canadian waters, its depths holding wrecks and darkness in equal measure. Michigan curves along the western shore, its storms legendary, its moods shifting with the seasons. Huron spreads east and north, connecting to smaller waters that feed into the system like veins feeding a heart. These bodies of water have witnessed centuries of human passage, native peoples in birch bark canoes, French explorers in wooden ships, modern vessels carrying cargo and tourists across routes mapped by GPS and sonar. Yet beneath the surface, beyond the reach of technology and light, something persists that predates human presence and may outlast it. The state police continue their patrols. New troopers take up positions along these shores, learning the roads and the communities they serve. Some will work entire careers without encountering anything unusual. Others will find themselves filing reports that match the ones contained in these chapters, adding their testimony to a growing archive of the unexplained. The department handles these cases quietly, neither dismissing them nor publicizing them, recognizing that some questions have no satisfactory answers and that the duty to document does not require the duty to understand. If you travel Michigan's highways after midnight, if you stop at scenic overlooks or walk deserted beaches when darkness settles over the water, remember that you are not alone. The lakes are always present, their surfaces hiding depths we cannot fathom, their shores marking boundaries we may cross without realizing. What you might see in the fog, what you might hear in the silence between waves, may stay with you long after you return to daylight and familiar places. The accounts recorded here represent only a fraction of the incidents reported by Michigan law enforcement over the past 2 decades. Others remain classified or sealed, their details deemed too sensitive or too disturbing for public release. Some cases were never written up at all, their witnesses choosing silence over the scrutiny that official reports would bring. The full scope of what occurs along Michigan's lakes after midnight may never be known, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some mysteries serve us better unsolved, reminding us that wonder and fear still have their place in a world we believe we have mastered. The lighthouses continue their rotation, casting beams across dark water. The radio towers transmit their signals into the night. The patrol vehicles make their rounds, headlights pushing back darkness in temporary victories that must be won again and again. And beneath it all, The lakes wait patient, ancient, aware. If you or someone you know has experienced something similar along Michigan's shores or anywhere else in America, if you have a verified account that deserves documentation, leave it in the comments below. These stories matter not because they provide answers, but because they remind us that certain questions remain perpetually open, certain territories remain forever wild. The troopers whose experiences form the foundation of tonight's episode have, with few exceptions, moved forward with their lives and careers. They do not seek attention or validation. They did their jobs, filed their reports, and carried the weight of what they witnessed into the days and years that followed. Their courage lies not in the encounters themselves, but in their willingness to acknowledge that courage has limits, that training and equipment and protocols cannot account for everything that walks the boundary between water and land when darkness falls. As we close this chapter of Sleepless Campfire, we acknowledge the vast, unknowable nature of the American landscape, particularly those places where water meets shore and the boundary between elements becomes uncertain. Michigan's lakes will continue to shape the lives of those who live and work along their edges, offering beauty and recreation and sustenance, while also maintaining their deeper nature indifferent to human understanding, unchanged by human observation, eternal in ways that dwarf our brief presence. The next time you see a patrol vehicle on a lonely stretch of highway after midnight, consider what the trooper behind the wheel might have seen, what calls they might have answered, what reports they might have filed that never made the news. They drive through darkness so that others may travel safely, and sometimes that darkness shows them things that no one should have to carry alone. Thank you for watching Sleepless Campfire. Until next time, stay safe out there.